birds and how to photograph them. It's Tutorial Tuesday. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where every week, every single Tuesday, you get a brand new, fresh photography tutorial. Now this week we're focusing on bird photography. Last week was wildlife photography, and then we're focusing in a little bit more now for just for birds, because they can be a challenging things to take pictures of. They're very fast, they move around a lot, they can literally fly, so they can be tricky to take photos of. It's also Rutland Bird Fair this weekend, and park cameras are going to be there, so it seems like what better time to talk about bird photography than right now? So we've got a bunch of tips. We're going to be talking about everything from camera settings, locations, kind of general tips and tricks, patience, practice, all kinds of stuff. So let's dive right in. Let's go straight in with tip number one. Let's start with tip number one. So our first tip is all about camera settings. So with bird photography, I find that generally the most important camera setting is that shutter speed. You want to have a really nice and fast shutter speed to allow you to capture the motion. Birds can be super fast, they're flying about all over the place, especially the little ones, they're darting about everywhere. And they can be difficult to kind of capture in flight and stuff like that unless you're using a really nice fast shutter speed to get a nice clear image. So I generally like to start about a thousandth of a second is generally where I'll kind of start, and then I'll adjust from there. Usually that's absolutely fine, especially for the bigger birds. I find that a thousandth of a second will freeze the motion, but sometimes you might want to go even faster, something like 1250, or even up a little bit more if you're still struggling. That's going to make sure you have a nice clear, crisp image. Nothing is better than getting the photo of a bird in flight, check the back of the camera, oh, nailed it, in focus, nice and clear, nice and crisp, as opposed to it's just a little bit blurry. Now that fast shutter speed is going to eliminate camera shake with the longer lenses. It's going to also just eliminate any motion blur from the bird actually moving, and you can get really, really nice images, especially if the bird is in flight. Always going to look so good. Now I tend to shoot in manual myself, just because I just tend to shoot in manual. Once I learnt manual when I originally started taking photos, I pretty much just never shot anything else. But you could absolutely shoot in shutter priority if you wanted to. That'd be a totally reasonable way of doing it, because then you're just going to make sure you're getting that nice, quick shutter speed. Otherwise, I tend to shoot pretty wide open, so as wide as the lens will go, just to get a nice shallow depth of field, so I get nice blurred backgrounds and stuff like that. I just think that looks really nice. It's kind of a personal preference, but for me, that's what works best. Now, I tend to leave it on auto ISO. That's mostly because I'm moving around quite a lot. I'm moving where I'm shooting as well, the direction I'm shooting. So sometimes I'll be shooting with the sun to my back, or I might be pointing into a shadowed area like trees and things like that. And especially if you're in a wooded area where there's lots of tree cover, there's lots of shadows, there's patches of light and patches of darker areas. It's just easier, I think, to use auto ISO. That frees you up to then focus on composition, focusing, making sure you're actually nailing the picture, as opposed to worrying so much about ISO. Also, I feel like if I was shooting in manual ISO, I'd be forever changing it. I'd be changing it all the time. Or you'd come out with kind of muddy, dark pictures, which is just not what anyone wants. So I tend to leave it on auto ISO. I just find that to be an easier way of shooting. Most of the photos I've been taking recently have been all shot on Sony, which generally handle ISO really well. So I'm not fussed if it's bumping it up. I'm really not going to be bothered at all. I'm not going to suffer from noise and stuff like that. But even with that said, on a bright day, shouldn't have much of an issue in terms of having to bump that ISO up really past sort of ISO 800. I also tend to shoot on continuous shooting mode so that I can really make sure I'm getting the shot. Now, there's something to be said for not kind of spraying and praying when you're taking these photos, to just holding down the shutter. That's definitely not the right approach, but shooting continuous, especially when the bird's in flight, can just make sure you get a few options to then pick from in post. I generally don't like to advise just taking thousands of photos and then going back and just picking out one or two, because it just feels like it's not a particularly it doesn't feel like a very good way of taking photos. It doesn't feel like there's really anything to be learnt there. It's kind of just spraying and praying and getting lucky. So I like to try and compose my photos as much as I can, but I tend to leave it on continuous, because if anything happens, a bird starts taking off or comes into land, if I'm shooting on continuous, then I'm going to get a few frames, and you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen. If a bird comes into land on the water, it can look really cool, and on continuous, you're going to get a few different shots of it landing. So I think it's worth doing that, but just be aware of not spraying and praying the whole shoot. Also, in terms of autofocus, I have my finger on the custom button on the camera to change the autofocus mode. So I'll start off in like a wide autofocus, or I'll let the camera pick out autofocus points, and then I'll change to an autofocus point that I'm controlling very quickly, so that, if, for example, if a bird is behind some branches on a tree, I can actually move the point of focus in myself. And I sometimes even go in for manual focus, especially with the small birds. Now that might sound a bit counterintuitive because they're so fast, it can be really difficult to focus, but they tend to like to hang out in kind of really bushy trees where there's a lot of cover, there's lots of branches. And sometimes I just cannot get the autofocus to kind of hone in on them. And certainly not quick enough. So I tend to just, in those situations, pop on manual focus and just quickly use something like focus peaking just to make sure that I'm getting the shot, and just quickly do that. So it's worth knowing your camera, knowing where those buttons are, knowing where all the switches are to change all that stuff, because if you can do that on the fly, you're definitely going to get better shots. You're definitely going to be more prepared, and it just lends a versatility to the way you're shooting. Now, tip number 2 is all about locations. And for me, if I'm going out to take photos of birds, there's 3 things I'm looking for. The first one is some sort of body of water. They like to hang around the water. I'll tell you what, if you can find a nice lake, a pond, a reservoir, anything like that, you're probably going to find birds. You're probably going to find different types of birds. Now, you're generally going to find a lot of kind of common birds, so seagulls, pigeons, stuff like that, but you will find things like herons and stuff like that. Even low tide with the sea, you can find some really cool birds. You can see them doing interesting things. You know, seagulls will be there diving to get crabs and mussels and stuff like that. But you can find herons at the sea at low tide. I found herons at the sea at low tide before. That's easy enough to do. But you can find things like geese. Any kind of body of water is going to attract birds. And similarly, that goes for wetlands as well. If you've got any wetlands local to you, that can be a great area to spot all kinds of different birds. Now, I don't really have any wetlands around where I live, but I've got a river with sort of marsh around it, which I guess is close enough. It's enough of a thing, and there's certainly quite a lot of different birds there as well. Now, again, you get the standard sort of seagulls and magpies and all that kind of stuff, but you do get some interesting birds as well. So it's worth checking that out. Any kind of body of water like that, or wetlands, marshlands, anything like that. Now, another area you can go is any kind of forest. Now, this can be a little bit more tricky because the trees provide a natural cover. I'm guessing that's probably why the birds are there. You know, the trees provide a nice natural cover, but they're also a nice place to nest as well. So you can walk through a forest and not see a single bird, even though there's loads around. So it's all about kind of slowing down and actually looking for them and listening. Because you can often hear, I can't count the number of times I've walked around, there's a local wood to me, I can hear a woodpecker, but I just cannot find it. For the life of me, I cannot find it. But it's about slowing down, taking in your surroundings, watching, being quite still and quiet yourself, and really looking out for those birds, because there's loads in there in the forest, and you can find little birds in the trees as well. Like I said before, they like to hang out in those kind of bushy trees with lots of little branches that are difficult to see into, but they like to hang out in there, and if you can get a nice shot, it can look great. That actually really nicely leads us on to tip number 3, which is all about patience. So, like I say, especially with small birds, especially if you're going out to the forest or something like that, you can find some really interesting birds. So things like woodpeckers, the little birds like sparrows and blue tits and all that kind of stuff. They like to fly about, but they can be really difficult to spot. So patience is just such a big part of bird photography, because unless you are in a local park with ducks and stuff like that, you are going to have to wait. You are going to have to really put the time in to finding these birds and finding a good spot to see them from. I'm kind of waiting for them to come into your view, or being still enough so they're not bothering them. But it's just about time and patience. And that kind of leads on to another thing actually, which is budgeting enough time for your shoot. You know, if you go out to take photos of birds and you've given yourself an hour and a half, you're probably not going to get anything super special unless you're really lucky. But if you go out for a whole day, you need to budget enough time for it, because it's not like portraits of people, obviously, where you can get to pose. You have to wait and you have to put in that time and patience. It's just all about patience. It's so key. So you have to just be ready to put in the time. Tip number 4 is all about dressing appropriately. So this is a pretty obvious one, but it can be so easy to forget, and I have forgotten so many times, generally to wear walking boots or something like that, because I've worn trainers before and then I've had to throw those trainers out afterwards because either I'm down by the sea and they're just ruined, or I'm out in a forest and it's been raining or something like that, and it just gets ridiculous. So if you can get walking boots, that's perfect. But more so than that, you want to dress in a way that's you don't want to bring attention to yourself. You don't want to be too colourful. This probably wouldn't be ideal, for example. You want to blend in with your surroundings. Now that might sound a bit like hardcore, but honestly, it doesn't. You don't have to wear camo. Obviously, that's the ultimately professional bird photographers are going to go out in camo. But if you can dress in something that's going to kind of blend in with the woodland or the wetlands or anything like that, you're not going to startle birds. If you go out in a bright red or bright blue t-shirt, then you're probably going to give yourself away, and the birds probably are going to move away because you stand out from the rest of nature. You stand out, so they're going to notice you, they're going to see you moving, and they're going to be off. So generally you want to wear something that's going to blend in, because it's just going to allow you to move around a little bit easier without drawing loads of attention to yourself and scaring off all the birds. And finally, tip number 5 is basically practice makes perfect. It's worth going to your local park, going to your local pond, anything nearby, even if it's ducks and pigeons and seagulls, just taking pictures, because you're still going to get them in flight, you're still going to get them moving around, they are birds, they are still birds, they're just not going to be fussed by the fact there's people around. So if you can go there and take pictures of them, you can really hone your skills. And I think it's probably better to go and do that than try and hone your skills out in the forest, where it's going to be much harder. And if you can hone your skills in a park, you get 100 shots of ducks and seagulls and stuff like that, 100 good shots. Then you go out in the forest and you're much further ahead than you would have been in a difficult environment, and you just increase your own chances of getting those good photos of interesting birds. It is just much easier to take photos of birds in a local park, but they're just used to people, they're not fast. In fact, if anything, they'll probably come up to you because they want food. And I just think that's a great way to get better at taking these photos. It can be difficult with long lenses. It can be difficult to take photos. It can be difficult handheld. You want to practice your settings. You want to practice editing as well, maybe. You want to practice your composition, which is such a big part of things like this. Where better to do it than with birds that will basically sit there for you? I think that's ideal, especially if you want to practice birds in flight as well. They down by my local park, just about a mile away from me, they will fly around the big lake. They will absolutely fly around. I can get photos of them landing, taking off, doing all kinds of stuff, and I'm able to practice my bird photography rather than basically having to go out on some hike and just kind of hoping that I'll be able to figure it out when some amazing bird shows itself for about 3 seconds. So I think it's better to practice in a nice, easy, local place, and then be ready for the more challenging, difficult, awesome stuff when you head out. Now, I hope these tips were helpful. If you do have any of your own tips, I'd love to hear them down in the comments. Someone did point out that actually a big part of wildlife photography as a whole, but bird photography this would apply to as well. In the last video, someone pointed out that it's very important not to disturb the animals, and that is definitely true. You can't just be going traipsing in and kicking up a storm and stuff for them. It's really, that's the most important thing, really, is making sure that you respect the animals. This is where they live, and you want to stay out of the way as much as possible. You don't want to scare them or disturb them or anything like that. It's just not good. So that is a really good point. Someone pointed that out in the last video. I thought that was a great tip. If anyone has any more, I mean, there's thousands of tips. I definitely have only scratched the surface. So any more, pop them down in the comments. I love hearing your tips. I love hearing all the kind of tips you guys have for this kind of stuff. And I'm sure there's a bunch of you out there who are much better bird photographers than I am. So I'd love to hear about that. If you did like the video though, give it a thumbs up. That always helps us out. Next week, I think we'll dive maybe back into Lightroom. I feel like those videos are well received. So if you want to see anything in particular, pop it down there as well. Otherwise, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that. Other Tutorial Tuesdays, reviews, all kinds of stuff. Throwback Thursday, there's loads of stuff going on now. There's loads of stuff, so make sure to subscribe for all of that, especially if you're new. I'll see you in the next video, and as always, thanks for watching. Birds. As opposed to worrying so much about ISO. Also, I feel like if I don't have an auto ISO, I'm basically spending the whole time adjusting Brilliant. Can't install updates. That's what you want. Why not? We found some issues. I'm in the middle of a video. Fix issues. What? What? If all I had to do was click a button that says fix issues, could it not have done that without me? Could it not have, like, did it need me? Like, it needs permission? Maybe it does. Maybe it needs permission to fix the issues. I mean, I have no idea what it did to fix them. But thanks very much. I'll get on with the video then, I suppose. Great news, quick update. I know that I'll put this clip directly after the clip with the updates. Literal updates. But quick update on the update. It's all fine now. I literally just had to click a button that said fix now. So that literally fixed it, and I don't know why I had to click it. But you know what? I like being included. I like being included in the process. You know, I guess I fixed this computer. It was literally me who fixed it. Yes, all I did was click a button that said fix now, but someone had to do that. You know, so I'm not saying I'm a hero, because I don't really have to say it. You know, it's implied. It's implied. Thanks for watching.